turn up your mind.
Something's wrong. Those chilling words were uttered last night by a medical technician present at the execution of Clayton Lockett, when it dawned on officials that their experimental new drug cocktail, designed to put Lockett to death, was not working. 10 minutes after the execution began, a doctor declared Clayton Lockett was unconscious. But at 6:36, Lockett began writhing. Minutes later, it started getting particularly ugly.
Reporter Graham Lee Brewer of the Oklahoman was one of the official witnesses.
He began kicking his feet, lifting his head and his chest off the gurney, grimacing, clenching his teeth, and a couple of moments he actually mumbled.
At 6:39, a prison official said to witnesses, "We are going to lower the blinds temporarily," and they did. It was clear at that point to officials in attendance that something was very, very wrong.
After conferring with the warden and unknown how much drugs had went into him, it was my decision at that time to stop the execution.
According to an AP reporter in attendance, prison officials said they would try to get Lockett to the hospital to resuscitate him, the man that they were just moments ago trying to kill. Well, they did not succeed in resuscitating him. At 7:06 p.m., Clayton Lockett was declared dead. He died of a heart attack 43 minutes after the drug was administered. A gruesome period of what can only be described as torture by incompetence. Although, when you look at the full context of this execution, when you zoom back and take it all in, incompetence is far, far too gentle a term. Something more like sinister, insistent, willful malice is more apt. And no one is more central to that story of malice than Republican Governor Mary Fallin, who last night was forced to stay the execution of a second prisoner set to be executed that night, after she pushed and pushed to go ahead with last night's executions against all warnings and due process. Today, she promised an investigation into the botched execution she herself had so zealously advocated. The two men who were scheduled to be killed last night were found guilty of crimes so unspeakably horrible and repugnant, they deserve the harshest penalty a humane society metes out. Well, Oklahoma, they have the death penalty. And the state was intent on putting them to death. But here's the thing. Oklahoma is having trouble finding the drugs to kill its inmates.
Yeah, what a disgusting story to start a show with, right? But we do need to talk about it. So, welcome to the Thursday edition of the Randi Rhodes Show. I'm Nicole Sandler of RadioOrNot.com, in for Randi today. She will be back Monday to bring us into the home stretch. But there are some important issues that we do need to discuss. And I'll tell you something. There is a reason that I'm going to talk about this story, this story about a botched execution, and the Republicans, the Senate Republicans, filibustering the vote to open debate on raising this nation's minimum wage. You know what the connecting thread is here? Let's see if you can figure it out. 866-87-RANDY, 866-877-2634, because there is a definite connection here. But let's start. See if you can figure it out. We'll get there, but if we'll take you if you think you got it. Starting with this botched execution. This murderer and rapist who was scheduled to be executed the night before last, Clayton Lockett. I can't imagine anybody who more deserves to die a heinous death than him. His crimes were so sickening. One of them, a teenage victim of his, he buried her alive in a shallow grave, and I guess watched, waiting for her to die. He apparently, I can't find this right now, but I read that he raped and then murdered his girlfriend's 11-month-old baby. I mean, look, if ever somebody deserved to be executed, and in a horrible way, it's probably him. The question is, in this day and age, it is the year 2014, is the practice of executing a prisoner something that we should be doing? Now, let me, tell you why I'm conflicted about this. Because if it were my daughter who was raped and buried alive in a shallow grave, you better believe not only would I want the rapist and murderer killed, I'd want to do it myself with my own bare hands. But, I think about that, and then I think about the statistic that tell us about how many people on death row are actually innocent. And it's enough to make a statistical, difference there. I think about Troy Davis. You remember Troy Davis? For a couple of weeks there, wow, he was on everyone's mind. We were all Troy Davis, remember, on the interwebs. I am Troy Davis. We put up his picture as our avatar. We stood firm because this was a man who was fingered by the actual murderer. And there was enough evidence for most of us to believe in his innocence, and he was still executed by the state of Georgia. And that happens all too often. So on the one hand, we have this barbaric principle. I still remember my mother and her admonitions. 2 wrongs don't make a right. 2 wrongs don't make a right. And I'll tell you something else. I would imagine that being locked up in a tiny cell with no privileges and no rights and no freedom, that's really lack of freedom, being locked in a tiny cell with no way out, no hope of parole, no hope of ever seeing daylight again. I can imagine that that would be a worse punishment than being let out of your misery. Once you're dead, you're dead. Sorry, you're dead. I understand there are some people who believe that heaven and hell and all that. But from what we know, what science tells us, sorry, you're dead, you're dead. You're put out of your misery. I want these miserable criminals to live every moment knowing that those heinous acts they committed put them there. I want them to remember the horrible things they did. And being made to live out your life in a tiny cell, I think that's pretty good punishment. I'm wondering, is it time to end this barbaric practice? In that piece we just played, which was the opening segment on All In with Chris Hayes last night, he talked about the barbaric nature of that execution. Rachel Maddow did a similar thing, only she went through the history of the methods that we have used in the past to execute prisoners. From hanging to firing squad. She talked about Gary Gilmore. Gary Gilmore, another heinous murderer, was given a choice of how he wanted to die, and he chose the firing squad. The firing squad. And then, we outgrew those. We realized, oh, God, those are pretty barbaric. A hanging death. Sometimes death didn't come instantly. Sometimes the person being executed would be, hanging by their heads and just writhing and suffering and maybe breaking a neck but not quite dying. So, and of course, firing squad, that's kind of messy. Someone's got to clean that up, right? Mm-hmm. Then we went to the electric chair. Remember old Sparky? Yeah, except, the people that would witness these executions would tell of the sick nature of electrocuting someone to death, just burning people alive. I mean, in essence, is what you're doing there. So now they come up with the lethal injection. In practice, in theory, I guess it should work. We've all, I would guess, all us pet owners, pet lovers, have been in the sad predicament, the sad situation of having to put a pet down, a pet that you love, that you've loved for years. It's part of your family, and we want to end the suffering. I had to do it with my dog Pooh just last summer, and I hate to say it, it's coming up with Sasha, her sister, because she's not doing well. But I know that the vet will first give her a sedative, and it'll calm her down, and she'll fall asleep. And then the next shot stops her heart. I've had to do it twice before. I'm dreading the next time. But it seems like that isn't as peaceful as when we put human beings down. And what has happened is it seems the rest of the world has sort of matured around us. There's no European country left that has the death penalty. None. And that's why we find ourselves in this predicament. The states, I think there's still 38 or 39 of them, that have the death penalty can no longer get the drugs that they had used previously for this lethal cocktail. I think the first one sedates you. The second one paralyzes you. The third one stops your heart. Okay, but they can't get those drugs anymore because the drug manufacturers will not sell them to the states for the purpose of executing someone. So they're left to their own devices to try to find a new and effective way to kill a human being, even if it is a human being as heinous as this rapist and murderer, who was so heinous even his stepmother thought he should be executed. Now, look, I mean, the entire act of executing somebody is barbaric in and of itself. So is there really a distinction between executing someone humanely or just, killing them because they're rapists and murderers and shouldn't live? Have you thought about the connection yet? All right, I'll tell you what. We'll take a break here. We'll come back on the other side. I'll give you the connection between killing even the worst examples of people walking the earth, killing the worst of the worst criminals out there, and the Republican Party in the Senate, yesterday's Senate Republicans filibustering the motion to open debate on raising the minimum wage in this country. It's pretty stunning, but it all goes together. All right. 866-87-RANDY's the number, 866-877-2634. Nicole Sandler in for Randi Rhodes. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Randi Rhodes on Premier Radio Networks.
Well, today you got Nicole Sandler in for Randi Rhodes, and I opened up talking about this story that I actually stayed away from yesterday because I couldn't wrap my brain around it. As much as I think somebody who rapes and murders anyone, but my God, children, the most despicable creatures on the planet, don't deserve to live, is it our responsibility as a nation, as a society, to kill them? Is that the right punishment? Again, as my mother drilled into me when I was a kid, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Just because someone did something bad to you doesn't mean that you should do something bad back to them. And a better punishment, as I said, would be locking them up with no chance of seeing sunlight ever again. Or as, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this, Peropomaska something on Twitter just tweeted me, at Nicole Sandler, executions are not meant to be pretty. And what about the victims from these 2 scumbags? Did they die pretty? Or I like Peary 85, murderers should be made to spend the rest of their lives diagramming Palin's sentences. That's a good one. And as for the question as to what the connection is between, not only our practice of executing people, but the fact that, they botched the execution, can't even get that right, the connection, interesting, Brian in Miami on Twitter says the connection is poor and brown. All right, we're getting there. That's part of it. The part of it is, yes, that if you look at who's on death row, you're right. Most of those people will be poor and brown. Because if you are wealthy and white, you can kill people and get off with a defense of affluenza. Yeah. We have people in Congress who do not care about you if you are poor or brown. We have people in Congress in leadership positions. You've got Paul Ryan, who in this piece that in an interview he did back in March that prompted his meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus that lasted all of probably 15 minutes yesterday. and nothing was done. Not even an apology was made. In that interview, I'll just play one little clip from the soundbite.
This tailspin or spiral that we're looking at in our communities. You know, your buddy Charles Murray or Bob Putnam over at Harvard, those guys have written books on this, which is we have got this tailspin of culture in our inner cities in particular.
Yeah. So the tailspin of culture. He's talking about the black community. And Charles Murray, who's written books about how blacks are inferior to we whites, biologically, intellectually inferior. That's who he quotes, because that's what they think of you. And if you're just a poor, lazy black person living in poverty, well, gee, that's your own fault, isn't it? Why should we, help you? Or, as Rick Santorum actually had a moment of clarity. I know it doesn't happen very often, but he did. He nailed it.
People ask me, do Republicans care much about the poor as Democrats do? I'm not sure we do. Yeah, and guess what? I'm sure you don't. And that, my friends, is the connection. They don't care about you. And they're hypocrites on top of it. That's the other part. These people who are, kill them. The pro-death penalty people are the same people who call themselves pro-life. And I don't know how anyone who is in favor of executing anybody can call themselves pro-life. You know what? I believe in a woman's right to choose what's right for her body, for her family, for her future, and for this, thing that's growing inside her body that if she, decides to carry to term will become her baby. It's a woman's right to choose. And they're called, that makes me pro-life. I am pro-life. I believe in our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But those same people who call themselves pro-life, who are so quick to say, kill him. Do you remember the debate with Rick Perry? And they talked about how many people he had executed in Texas that year, and the crowd went wild. Because he put people to death. And the follow-up question was, do you ever worry about, you're going to execute an innocent man? No, I don't worry about that. Do you think Troy Davis should have worried about that? Because I do. Again, I can't imagine anyone who deserved a heinous death more than the guy whose execution was botched the other day. And then, the insanity of the whole thing. So they botch the execution. He doesn't die. He's suffering. They take him to the hospital and try to resuscitate him. Why? So they could kill him again? And they couldn't kill him, so he died. My brain wants to explode because it's insane. You want to talk about barbarians? That's what we are. We are barbaric in that we do this. Maybe you can free up some space in the prisons by letting out the people, who got busted during a stop and frisk for carrying a couple of joints. Victimless crime perpetrators who are now serving ridiculous prison sentences, and lock up the violent criminals. Now, put them on an island somewhere, like an old leper colony. That's fine. But should we be killing them? And should the people who are killing them be wearing their pro-life credentials on their sleeves? I think not. Nicole for Randy. We'll be right back. Well, it is Nicole Sandler in for Randy. She'll be back Monday. And so, all right, so we were just talking about the boxed execution. That should be a good nickname for the Republicans, botched execution. It's how they do everything. We were talking about that. We were talking about their disdain for the poor and people of color, right? They just don't get it. I'll tell you, my favorite tweet so far that has come in response to what we've been talking about so far comes from Tom Adler on Twitter. The right is not in favor of life. They're in favor of a government's right to choose. Badum. So look, they are in favor of, deciding what's right and wrong, okay? And most importantly, I think, keeping their children away from
oh, maybe those poor, children of color, I guess. There's a really sad trend happening in this country. Let me back up a little bit and tell you I am the product of the public school system. I was born in New York, went through 6th grade at PS 169 in Queens. Did fine. Moved to Florida to start 7th grade. And though I was way ahead of all the kids in my classes when I moved to Florida, I quickly fell back, right? But I made it through. I went through the public schools. I went to the University of South Florida. I had a public education, and I think I turned out okay. There is, of late, I've seen this vilification of teachers unions, and a push to privatize public education that I think is terribly dangerous. A little later, I'll tell you about my experience with my daughter in using some of those public funds to help pay for a private school education, and how badly that worked out for us. But I first want to bring in a friend. Her name is Sabrina Joy Stevens. On Twitter, she's at Teacher Sabrina. Teacher Sabrina, Executive Director of Integrity in Education. Their website is integrityineducation.org. And on Twitter, they are EDU Integrity. Sabrina Stevens, thanks for joining me today on the Randi Rhodes Show.
Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. I'm having a hard time spitting it out. But let me say this. You were a teacher. You taught 4th grade. You're one of the gutsiest women I know, because I've seen you get up and speak truth to power in situations where it may not have been comfortable. And you decided, right, you needed to do something. So you formed this group, Integrity in Education, and you say that's what your goal is, to restore integrity to the education conversation. The education conversation has gotten really ugly, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and that's exactly right. What's been incredibly frustrating, I remember even back when I first started teaching, I had an understanding of the inequities in our education system, but I really had no inkling at just how vilified the public school system and teachers in particular had become. I remember listening to, I would get up, before the sun had even risen, get ready to go to work, commute to work, spend all day teaching kids. After school I'd be preparing lessons and scoring things and all the other stuff that goes along with becoming a teacher. And then I'd drive home, after dark. And I remember listening to the radio and hearing basically that I was responsible for all of the problems facing society. And it was just incredible to me, this disconnect between, what the day-to-day experience was for me as someone working in one of those quote-unquote failing schools, and seeing the hardworking people around me who were all doing their best.
Right.
And then hearing about how our public school system was doomed because of teachers and all this other stuff. And so it really, it was a really stunning experience to see that disconnect between reality and rhetoric that passes for an ed policy debate.
It really is. I got to tell you, just last week, we got another, hidden tape from courtesy of our friends at Mother Jones. And this time, it was New Mexico Governor Susana Martinez. And one of the recordings was her and one of her, I guess, either her campaign person or an aide or something. And she was just bad-mouthing teachers. And, God, they make enough money. Yeah, they don't even work for 3 months. And, and then the guy says, well, we have a solution if it comes out that, during the campaign you said bad things about teachers. I know, we'll put up a YouTube video that no one will ever see, but it'll be there so that we can point to it and say, well, it's been on YouTube. I mean, that's the typical Republican way of doing things is, lie, cheat, and steal. But the fact of the matter remains, that is the contempt with which they hold our teachers, right?
Absolutely. And what's funny, too, is that, number one, most Americans love our teachers. Teachers routinely, between 7 and 8 Americans out of 10 says that they trust and respect teachers. Yet, and any politician, Democrat or Republican, will kill for those numbers. And yet, they are, routinely spreading this narrative that, every problem, and this, stretches to all sorts of issues we face right now, but that every single problem is the result of a bad individual. So bad teachers, occasionally they'll blame parents, occasionally they'll blame the kids themselves. opposed to, oh, we've completely refused to adequately fund the system. We've given people an impossible task, and when they somehow manage against all odds to do incredibly good, if you look at, performance, graduation rates, college-going rates, et cetera, all those are higher than they've ever been. Yet they're still saying that everybody is a failure, et cetera. And so it's like, yeah, because we haven't managed to achieve the impossible. We've achieved the quite astounding against all odds, but we haven't gotten to the impossible, and therefore we're all failures. It's crazy.
It is crazy. There was just a report issued in the last day or two that the U.S. public high school graduation rates are up to 80%, projected to be up to 90% in the near future. That is, let me just say, yeah, that could happen as long as they stop cutting funding to public schools, which brings me right to the next question. Sabrina Stevens is with us, teacher Sabrina on Twitter. She's the executive director of Integrity in Education. And so let me play devil's advocate for a moment and let you explain what's wrong with charter schools. What's wrong with charter schools? I mean, they're public schools, and it gives parents and students a choice of another school that they can go to instead of the one that is their local neighborhood school.
Well, for starters, our charter schools are fond of saying they're public schools until they get, for example, sued for violating the rights of students or teachers that public schools are meant to uphold, and then they say they're private. So there's a lot of times where, people try to have it both ways. They want to be public when it comes to funding, when it comes to access. They want to be private when it comes to actually providing equal access to all children or respecting the same types of rights. They want to be private when it comes to being exempt from regulations that would actually prevent a lot of the fraud and abuse that we see. So it's kind of this, they're trying to have it both ways in a lot of ways, and we need to address that across the country. That needs to be addressed. The other thing I have an issue with is that, school choice, and we talk about this a lot, is not often the choice of families and students. So a lot of times it is school districts making a choice, or, local developers in cahoots with private charter school companies and friendly elected officials who are making the choice about what schools people will go to. I'm a big fan of voice. We talk a lot about voice at Integrity in Education because we believe, if a community wants to have public school options, absolutely, go for it. If the community comes together and says, these are our assets, this is what we've got available to us, maybe we should have an art high school or something like that. Right. And they come together and come up with those options on their own.
But now what you're talking about...
That's how it should be.
Right. And for instance, I'm in Broward County, Florida, and we have those. Those are called magnet schools, and they're part of the public school system, and they're in the district. And yes, and you can apply to those magnet schools if you want, to specialize in your high school years in arts or in the sciences. And it's great. It really prepares kids, get in high school for their career. But those are not publicly funded private enterprises. And even those charter schools, and look, and there's two kinds of charter schools, right? There's the nonprofit charter schools, and then there's the for-profit charter schools. And sometimes the so-called nonprofit charter schools, they pay a pretty hefty salary to some of their principals, so they may be not for profit in its corporation charter, but in reality, there are some people getting really rich off of the money that should be used to educate our kids.
Absolutely. And that's the other really huge problem we see is that there was this original idea of giving some freedom, which, by the way, I think all schools should have. I don't think you should have to even be a selective enrollment school like a magnet school to be able to have a different focus if that's what the community wants.
Right.
But, what you do see a lot of is either these direct for-profit companies, so really, shady people like K-12 Inc., et cetera, that are directly profiting off of schools, or you have these kind of nonprofits in name only where they incorporate as a nonprofit and then they immediately outsource all of their operations to a corporate EMO that manages the school. And so then you have these issues where you see, it's like a land rush. People immediately see that there's money to be had. There's no, you don't have to have any credentials. You don't have to, and so much of a background check in some cases. And you can get access to millions of public dollars. And so that's a really huge problem that needs to be addressed.
I'm so glad you brought up K-12 because I have an article in front of me, and this just makes my blood boil. I remember, like at the beginning of the school year, I kept hearing all these commercials on the radio for K-12. It's a virtual online school. You could go, and then I did a little research into it just because it didn't sound quite quite right to me. And K-12 has contracts with school districts all over the country where they get so much public money. If you pull your kid out of the public school and let them do the K-12 online virtual school curriculum, they will get money from your school district. And here's the headline from this article. Enrollment at nation's largest for-profit charter operator still growing despite lawsuits, regulatory problems. K-12 Inc. is facing a litany of regulatory problems and a new shareholder lawsuit, but as long as new students are signing up, none of that matters to investors. They are getting rich and richer and taking money out of our public schools at the expense of our kids' educations.
Absolutely. And what's really incredible about them in particular is, number one, it is widely recognized that what they're offering is subpar. So they, right now, recently the NCAA decided that they're not going to accept coursework from over a dozen of their schools in California. So for kids who are looking to be eligible for athletic scholarships in college, they don't get credit if they're at K-12 Inc. schools because they recognize that they're not giving a quality educational experience. Those kids are not going to be prepared for college. The other thing that is really insidious, especially from the advertising front, is the way they do it. I was watching TV with my stepdaughter a few weeks ago, and they were advertising on Nickelodeon. Wow. So we're sitting there, we're watching a show. Can you imagine? You want your kids to get a quality educational experience, and they're marketing directly to your child.
Oh, God.
They're sitting there saying basically, don't go to school every day when you could sit at home in front of your computer. It was outrageous. And so it was, this kind of, just the way that they use this marketing, and that's where a lot of their money goes because they don't have the same overhead costs, as a brick and mortar school. They don't have as many teachers. There's usually, a ratio of, sometimes 1 to 60, et cetera. And so their focus is primarily on enrolling new students. That's there's a teacher, Darcy Zadorfa, who's an incredible teacher, and she's in her doctorate program now. And she wrote about her experience as a K-12 Inc. teacher and how incredibly draining and heartbreaking it was because they were, she didn't have the ability to really connect with her students and make sure that they were getting the support that they needed. And she herself was overworked. She had this huge roster. Some of the full-time teachers, she says, have over 300 students that they're responsible for. And a lot of times the software that they use to even run the classes doesn't work. So, a lot of their time is spent not actually teaching, but helping kids figure out when there's a bug in the system.
Oh, no.
What are they going to do about it? I mean, it's just everywhere you turn, there are issues with this model.
Right.
And they're proposing it as though it's a solution. It's also funny, too, that they're caught up on test scores, and yet they perform half as well, even on test scores.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. Hey, Sabrina, we're running short on time, but I want to ask you one other question, which is really disconcerting. Is that, look, in Florida, of course, we know Jeb Bush is one of the leaders of the school voucher idea and charters and all that. President Obama has shared the stage with Jeb Bush talking about charters, and now Howard Dean is getting. How are these people being so misled?
Well, what's interesting, too, so there's definitely been a lot of misinformation out there. And I think what's been really upsetting about the Democrats in particular is that they've kind of thrown education and teachers overboard as a way to, look bipartisan. So, and because a lot of people, unfortunately, really haven't done their homework on this issue. And so they hear the nice-sounding talking points from these, people looking to privatize schools, and then they just run with it, as opposed to really looking into, well, wait a minute, does this make sense? Does that add up? Is that really what we believe in? I think what's interesting, especially with people like, there was recently a blog post that students first posted saying that both Howard Dean and Elizabeth Warren were supportive of their views on schools. And actually, that's not true. So, what's interesting is that there's been misinformation as well from their side about who really is with them on the issue. Now, Howard has had some problems. His brother, owns a charter school or something like that. And so there's been some, kind of had some back and forth on where his views actually are. But something to keep in mind is that a lot of these folks really haven't been put up to speed. And so they kind of, I think a lot of us, especially for folks who identify as Democrats, have some work cut out for them to make sure that that folks are really all understanding what the real issues are.
They do. And, in fact, you can help them understand the real issues. Sabrina Stevens, find her at integrityandeducation.org. Go there. Sign up for their emails. You're doing great work. We're going to continue this conversation on my show at radioornot.com because there's so much more to talk about. Thank you, Sabrina. We'll talk later. Bye-bye. I'll tell you about our experience using sort of a voucher here in Florida. Next. Nicole for Randy. Don't go away. Randy will be back on Monday to bring us into the home stretch of the Randi Rhodes Show. I'm Nicole Sandler of RadioOrNot.com. And so, all right, here's the deal with here in Florida. My daughter actually will turn 15 on Saturday. My, how time flies, right? If you didn't know, I adopted my daughter. She was an 18-month-old toddler when I adopted her from an orphanage in Kazakhstan. And I just wanted to give this little creature the best of everything. I really wanted to make her life good, you know. And I believed that meant a public education. And so she's gone to school here in Florida. In fact, we moved back to Florida from California and Taos in New Hampshire, and back to Florida in time right before she started kindergarten. And Allison, as I said before, has ADHD, and so she's a smart kid. You know, a smart kid, but she has trouble focusing. She has trouble in a classroom situation. And so I learned about Florida has this thing called a McKay Scholarship, where if your child has an IEP, you know, they have a diagnosis and they have an individualized educational plan, and they get some form of accommodations, that you can access money from the state of Florida to use towards a private school. So I did that. Because it was only ADHD, she got the smallest amount. Well, if I tell you she spent 1.5 years in a private school and only wanted to go back to public school, and I made a deal with her. I said, you get straight A's by the winter break, this was this year, and I'll let you transfer to the public high school. She had an A in algebra in the private school, moved into the public school with an F. Okay, she got it up to a D, but she was failing because they were so behind, even though they assured me at that private school, oh, we teach to the state curriculum. She's going to be right there with the public school kids. She was so far behind when she moved into that public school. I'm telling you, the whole thing is a scam. It is dangerous. You want your kids to learn? Give them a good public education. Nicole for Randy.
Turn up your mind.
I don't believe you ought to interfere in the market. If there's to be a minimum wage, my theory is if Oklahomans want a minimum wage, we ought to have it. I don't believe there ought to be a national minimum wage. That's my position. I'm the only member of the Republican Party that's still here that voted no on the last one. And I believe that markets work better than bureaucrats. And I think there's lots of downsides, and there's lots of written in the economics field on raising the minimum wage, whether you raise it $1 or $20.
Yeah. How about raising it $20? That would be good. That way people can actually afford to live. Welcome back. It's hour 2 of the Thursday edition of the Randi Rhodes Show. Randy will be back Monday. I'm Nicole Sandler of RadioOrNot.com. And, yeah, you know, that's one of those millionaire Republican senators who yesterday decided that, you know, working people just don't deserve a raise. Yeah, he is one of the 42 Republican senators who voted against opening debate on raising the minimum wage. Isn't that what senators are supposed to do, debate important issues and then vote on them? Well, this was a vote on the procedural motion to begin debate. And 42, every one of them Republicans, except for Harry Reid, who had to vote that way so he can actually bring the vote back again in a procedural manner. Every Republican in the U.S. Senate, with the exception of Bob Corker of Tennessee, voted against allowing debate on raising the minimum wage. By the way, an issue that around 71% of Americans are in favor of. Way to go, Republicans. Again, it all goes back to that thing. They just don't care if you're poor or black or brown or, you know, hurting. Hey, you're just lazy. You know, their whole roundabout way of thinking, you know, I try to follow their reasoning, and it just, God, it doesn't make sense. But if I can sort of try to piece it together, and I've heard it from all of them, from Paul Ryan to, every one of them. Oh, it keeps you down. If you're getting government subsidies, well, you're not going to be, you're not going to be incentivized to find work. You're just going to sit back and live the high life on, food stamps and unemployment. I mean, seriously? This is how they think. It's insane. It's because they're so far removed from reality, right? So, yesterday they did that. The senators voted against opening debate on raising the minimum wage. And it's interesting because today happens to be May 1st. It's May Day. May Day, International Workers' Day. And, it's celebrated around the world. This is how our Republican senators are honoring working people, saying, you can work for a pittance. And there's Tom Coburn saying, I don't think we should have a national federal wage. Let the free market determine it. The free market. Yesterday we talked about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And if that thing were to go through, and thankfully it's looking less and less likely with each passing day, but, stranger things have happened. If that were to go through, and we're now in this sort of weird, otherworldly trade agreement with nations like Vietnam, where I think the going rate for labor is something like 25 cents an hour, can you imagine if we didn't have a federal minimum wage here? What... it would leave it up to the market. Hey, you need a job, I need workers. Now I could ship these jobs overseas to Vietnam and pay $25 an hour, or, I'll pay you $4. You want the job or not? Because I'll find someone else to do it. That's what they want. I would like these people to have to live the life of somebody who works full-time for minimum wage. I think it comes out to somewhere around $15,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. And, it's below the poverty level. And that's why when Walmart and McDonald's and those other behemoth corporations pay their workers a non-living wage, they pay them minimum wage, it costs the taxpayers money. You get that, right? Because we have to subsidize their low salaries, their low wages, because their employees have to go on public assistance. And in fact, McDonald's, I think it was McDonald's, had a hotline set up for their employees to help them, help them access the food stamp program, help them get help from the government. That means help from you and me. For all this talk, this anti-government mentality, we're the government. That's something they've lost. These people who wave the Constitution around like a prop, who've never opened it and read the thing, don't they know the basic? It's government of, by, and for the people. That's how this democracy was set up. They badmouth the government, yet they want to work in it, right? They're happy. Paul Ryan's happy to take his $174,000 a year salary. But he, and then in the next breath, he'll talk about how bad the government is. They'll honor Grover Norquist. He says, we need to shrink government so small we can drown it in a bathtub. If you hate government so much, then don't work in it. Someone else would gladly take the job, who would do a better job. And for that matter, and we'll get into this a little later, for those people out there in Nevada who are taking up arms against federal officers, who don't recognize the authority of the federal government, how about we take back some of the vernacular? Love it or leave it. I choose to love it and try to make it hold to the ideals upon which it was founded. I've actually read the Constitution, unlike these idiots who wave it around, like a piece of jewelry. In the first hour, I played a little bit of this clip from Paul Ryan, right? I want to back it up and play it from the beginning again. This is him in March, and again, this comment caused a little bit of controversy because people like us called him out on it.
This tailspin or spiral that we're looking at in our communities, your buddy Charles Murray or Bob Putnam over at Harvard, those guys have written books on this, which is we have got this tailspin of culture in our inner cities in particular, of men not working and just generations of men not even thinking about working or learning the value and the culture of work. And so there's a real culture problem here that has to be dealt with. Everybody's got to get involved. So this is what we talk about when we talk about civil society.
But boy, his impression of inner city residents, of minorities, is so warped. And it might be because, you know, he's a big Ayn Rand kind of person. And in that cut, he was quoting Charles Murray. Charles Murray, who's best known for his books, his social science books, that say that blacks are inferior biologically and intellectually. They're inferior to us white people. This is who he's quoting, right? And then he goes on to say this.
Everybody's got to get involved. So this is what we talk about when we talk about civil society. If you're driving from the suburb, you know, to the sports arena downtown by these blighted neighborhoods, you can't just say, I'm paying my taxes, government's going to fix that. You need to get involved. You need to get involved yourself, whether through a good mentor program or some religious charity, whatever it is, to make a difference. And that's how we help resuscitate our culture.
Really? So that's it. That's the answer. Rely on charities who are hard-pressed enough as it is. Rely on churches who you know, take in money from their parishioners, right, and try to help, you know, their members. They're supposed to fix blighted neighborhoods rather than rely on the government. I'll tell you what, Paul Ryan, how about raising taxes on the millionaires and billionaires who your new budget wants to give them yet more tax cuts? How about making them pay a little bit more so that we can help fix those blighted communities? How about letting the wealthiest among us contribute a little bit more to help the rest of us who are hurting right now? Oh, no. No, you should just rely on churches and charities for that. Really? You know, we've seen this play before. We've seen this movie before. And it didn't work well. You know, the last time I was here for Randy, a few weeks ago, we interviewed the Princeton professor who was one of the authors of this new study that says, yeah, you know, sorry, America has become an oligarchic society, although he said they didn't use that word, but everybody, every analysis of the study, the headline read, we are in an oligarchy. And the average person doesn't even bother weighing in with their elected officials because they think their voice doesn't matter. They think their opinion doesn't count anymore. Well, one of the greatest economic minds, I believe, Paul Krugman, was interviewed by another great journalistic mind, Bill Moyers, about just this situation.
You said we live in such an ugliness in America right now.
Yeah. This is one of the things that puzzles me, actually, about my own country, which is it's one thing to have disparities of income and wealth and to have differing views about what we should be doing about it, but there is a level of harshness in our debate, mostly coming from the people who are actually doing very well. So, you know, we've had a parade of billionaires whining about the incredible injustice that people are actually criticizing them.
They hurt my
and then
feelings.
Comparing anyone who criticizes them to the Nazis. You know, it's almost a tick that they have. This is very strange, and it's kind of scary because, you know, it's one thing if someone without a lot of power seems to be going off into a rage for no good reason, but these are people who have a lot of influence because of the amount of money they control.
Yep. Given what you've just said, and given the fact that there's this ugliness, what do you think it's going to take? A mass uprising? Consistent demonstrations? Insurgent politics? How are we going to stem the tide that he says is taking us into oligarchy?
There's a negative and there's a positive take. Piketty seems to argue for much of the book that we only escaped from the old oligarchy for a while thanks to really disastrous events, thanks to wars and depressions which disrupted the system. That's an argument you can make. On the other hand, if you read histories of the New Deal, you know that it didn't spring out of nowhere, that we had a progressive movement and a lot of proto-New Deal programs building for quite a long time. There was, in fact, a move in America. There was an increasing political, philosophical readiness to take on inequality of wealth and power long before FDR moved into the White House. And so I think there are better angels of our nature, that there is this ugliness which can be frightening, but there is also a redemptive streak in here and in other places, and that you don't give up hope on this, that given consistent argumentation, given events, and perhaps, as people become more aware of what is actually going on, then there is a chance of changing things. Do we know that? No, but there's nothing in what we know now that says that you should give up hope of being able to change this even without catastrophe.
Oh, even without catastrophe. So there's Paul Krugman saying it was a progressive movement that changed things before. And the progressive movement was taking hold even before FDR got into the White House. This movement to take on wealth and power. You know what they say, history repeats itself. That progressive movement is here. We're here. We're sort of like the silent majority. We have no access to the biggest megaphones in the country, right? They're taking that away from us. But boy, we're here, and it's bubbling under. And it's rising up today, May Day, in a big way in Seattle. When we return from the break, I will tell you what happened today in Seattle, where traditionally on May Day, workers march. They do this every year. It's an annual May Day protest in downtown Seattle. They march for immigrant and worker rights, including the campaign for a $15 an hour minimum wage. All right, on the other side, I'll tell you what they did in Seattle. Bernie Sanders coming up, too, and your calls at 866-87-RANDY, 866-877-2634. Nicole Sandler in for Randi Rhodes. We'll be right back. All right, so it's Nicole Sandler in for Randi Rhodes, and in the city of Seattle today, they announced a deal to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour by the end of the decade. How interesting is it that this comes the day after the U.S. Senate, the Republicans in the U.S. Senate filibustered the cloture motion, the vote to open debate on the subject. Right? Pretty sickening. And I got to give props to Senator, where is he? Bob Corker of Tennessee, who was the only Republican who voted with the Democrats to begin debate on the bill. And his quote to, when asked about it from Talking Points memo, he said, "While I think the underlying policy is problematic, I think we should always debate ways to help improve the standard of living of Americans." Right. The rest, every single one of the other Republicans in the U.S. Senate said, nope, we're not even going to talk about it. I'm just going to hold my nose and hold my breath until my face turns blue, because I don't think those damn poor people have a right to a living wage. All right, the second part I just threw in there. But really, I mean, that's what happened here. So this is cool. Let's see. The increase in Seattle will phase in at different speeds for businesses of various sizes. Employers with more than 500 employees would have 3 years to adjust their pay scales, while smaller companies would have 5. Tipped workers would become subject to the $15 per hour minimum after 5 years, and that's huge because right now, if you go to a restaurant, for instance, like here in Florida, the wait staff, they're paid such substandard wages. It's like $3 an hour or something.
I believe it's $2.13. Hasn't changed since 1991.
Disgusting. So when you think, wow, I got to tip, the bill is so expensive, you need to tip because they get paid $2.13 an hour. Oh, my God. Well, you know who we really can credit in Seattle for this? Shama Sawant. Does that name sound familiar? She is a new city councilwoman in Seattle, and she is a socialist. Yes, Sawant forced a runoff with 35% of the primary vote and went on to defeat her opponent in a close contest in November. And listen to, she's the real deal. I'm looking at an interview that our friend Joshua Holland did with Councilwoman Sawant at BillMoyers.com. Sean, I'll send it to you. You can put it in the homework section. And he writes, Sawant walks the walk. She kept her campaign promise to take home only $40,000 out of her $117,000 salary, saying in a release that a hefty paycheck, quote, removes council members from the realities of life for working people. Every council member faces a choice of who they represent and which world they inhabit. My place is with working people and their struggles. And so Josh asked her, well, what do you do with the rest of the salary? And she said, technically I'm paid $117,000 by the city. I'm taking home $40,000 and I'm giving the rest to social justice movements. I've created a solidarity fund, but I want to make it clear that it's not charity. The point is that if we are to have a political system that's accountable to the interests of the majority, then how are we going to do it with public officials and executives being paid salaries that are completely out of the realm of the average worker? Really good point. She's amazing. This woman is a rising star. She is a socialist, a self-identified socialist. Interesting that Senator Bernie Sanders, just moments ago, finished speaking on the floor of the Senate. It was, I guess, open speech time. And he was talking about wealth inequality in this country. Well, guess what? Bernie Sanders, although he is labeled an independent, by the media always, is actually a democratic socialist. That's one of the things I'm going to ask him about when he joins us after the break. Really, socialism has been given, become a dirty word, just like liberalism was, and just like they're trying to make progressive into a dirty word. I say we take it back. I say we could use a little more socialist attitudes in this country and take care of one another. Nicole for Randy, Senator Sanders next.
Rhodes. I don't believe there ought to be a national minimum wage.
That was Oklahoma Senator Tom Coburn. Yesterday, after the Senate Republicans voted to filibuster the cloture motion to begin debate on a bill to raise the minimum wage. They said, nope, we're not even going to discuss it. And there you have Senator Coburn saying, no, I don't think we should have a national minimum wage. Boy, what a horrible policy that would be. I'm Nicole Sandler in for Randi Rhodes, and I'm thrilled to welcome our next guest to the show, Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont. Actually just finished speaking on the Senate floor a few minutes ago. Senator Sanders, I got to hear the last couple of minutes during a commercial break, thanks to C-SPAN streaming, and it's always a pleasure to hear you speaking, because I agree with pretty much everything you say.
Well, thank you very much, Nicole, and nice to be with you.
Always nice to talk with you. This issue of income inequality is one of the I think most pressing issues of our day. We look at the data, and it shows that the rich in this country, the top 1%, if you will, their income has just risen exponentially over the last decade, while the middle class has just remained stagnant, has remained flat. And in fact, a news story broke just the other day that the U.S. middle class used to be the strongest in the world, and now we've been surpassed by Canada and other nations. Our middle class it's a dying breed, it seems.
It is, and this is the great tragedy of modern America. Median family income has gone down by $5,000 since 1999. You have millions of Americans today all over this country who are working longer hours for lower wages despite huge increases in technology and productivity. And as you've indicated, the great middle class of the United States now lags behind Canada and I suspect several Scandinavian countries as well.
Senator Sanders, I adopted my daughter as a single woman in the year 2000. I was doing well, as a radio professional living in Los Angeles, had a good job, a great salary. The American dream, it used to be that we always would strive to give our children a better life than our parents were able to give us. And it was always possible, it seemed, generation after generation. And I had no reason to think that the life I could give my daughter would be any different. I would be able to give her a great life and things would be well. And boy, since that time, since 2000, it just seems to have gone from bad to worse to almost disastrous, to tell you the truth.
Well, Nicole, what the facts are is that, and I have 4 kids, we have that generation, the younger generation today, has the dubious distinction of being the first generation of the modern history of America to likely have a lower standard of living than their parents. So what's happening now in America is we have more people living in poverty than ever before. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. We have a middle class that's disappearing, but at the same time, the people on top are doing phenomenally well. And according to recent studies, 95%, listen to this, 95% of all new income generated in America goes to the top, you guess.
I'd say top 1/2 of 1%.
It's top 1%.
Okay, well, there you go.
95% of all new income goes to the top 1%, which means that the vast majority of the people are losing ground. Prices of gas at the pump are going up.
Unbelievably.
Food is going up.
Everything.
Costs are going up, and yet people's wages are remaining stagnant or in some cases going down. Now, getting back to Senator Coburn's position on the minimum wage, what you have here is yesterday we had a vote.
Right.
And the vote was to raise the national minimum wage from $7.25 to $10.10 an hour. Actually, the vote was to allow us to
talk about it, right? Exactly.
We got one Republican to allow us to go forward to debate the issue. And today you had on national radio Senator Coburn saying essentially he does not believe in a federal minimum wage. Now, the truth is that Coburn is not the only Republican to have that position. There are many Republicans. And what they believe, and this is a very important point, what this right-wing extremism that they espouse is about is basically withdrawing the government from protecting the needs of the middle class and working families in almost every area that you can think of. So in terms of the minimum wage, most of us think, and most Americans think, $7.25 is a starvation wage. We've got to raise it to at least $10.10 an hour. That's what the American people think. What these guys are saying is, no minimum wage. Let's end the concept of the minimum wage. And if in a high unemployment area, an employer says, well, I'm prepared to hire you, and I'm going to pay you $4 an hour. And you say $4 an hour, that's a starvation wage. And what he says, well, I got 10 other people.
Right. Take it or leave it.
Take the job. That's freedom. Do you understand the point? These guys believe in quote-unquote freedom.
Yeah.
And that is not having the government interfere to make sure that you at least earn a minimal wage. And so the same thing in terms of job safety. You could be working in a plant where people are losing their fingers or their arms, and you don't want the government to interfere to make sure that people work in a reasonably safe environment. That's terrible. And then we should abolish the EPA because that is restricting the freedom of companies, Nicole, to pollute our air and our water and our soil. But that's just a terrible, oppressive government. You want to get rid of that as well. That is what, not to mention Social Security, Medicare.
Right. They want you to have the freedom to starve to death or to freeze to death or to be homeless or to live on the streets.
Exactly. That is their definition of freedom. And, in fact, what has happened in this country over the last 80 years, since the 1930s, is the whole story of the United States of America has been the effort to ensure rights for working people. Rights. So that when you get old, you know what, before Social Security, half of the elderly people in America lived in poverty.
Yes.
Today, while the number is too high because of Social Security, it's somewhere around 9%. Before Medicare, what happens if you were old and sick? What happened to you? Well, you had nothing.
Right.
And today you have Medicare. And if you were poor, you had nothing. Today you have Medicaid, et cetera, et cetera. And these guys are hell-bent. That is their vision. And people don't know it. This is what the Koch brothers and these guys are about. It's not just repealing the minimum wage. Ultimately, they want to get rid of Social Security and public health programs and a variety of other programs that protect the kids and the elderly and the sick.
And I always wonder this, though, Senator Sanders, to what end? I mean, where do they see this taking us other than into another Great Depression with millions of homeless people waiting on bread lines, living in tent cities?
I don't think that they think that high. I think what happens, and I'm not a psychiatrist,
right,
to be able to analyze a member of Congress
right,
looks at this thing, but I think what happens is if I say to you, guess what, Nicole? I am prepared to give you $50 million for your campaign. And this is what I believe. I believe we should get rid of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Suddenly, the ideas that I tell you attached to that large check for your campaign become quite appealing, right? Mm-hmm. And you begin to believe that stuff.
Yeah, right.
I think psychologically that's how it works. So they believe it, and they say this is what America is about. We don't want that big bag government protecting the elderly, the children, and the sick and the poor. But just coincidentally, I'm going to take a check from the corporate people or the Koch brothers, and who happen to also believe that.
Yeah, and then where their loyalties lie. And that's why we need campaign finance reform. I'm proud to say the one and only time that I was in the Senate gallery, you were speaking and you introduced your constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. And I'll tell it took everything in me not to scream out, yeah,
when you were done. But
well, I'm glad you didn't.
I know, because I would have been arrested, right? But it was so great. I mean, it was so great, and I would like the American people to wise up. I mean, look, the polls are like 70% is a conservative number. 70% of the American public believes it's time to raise the minimum wage, and yet, boy, those 41, I guess, Republican senators said no, we're not even going to talk about it. No debate. How?
This is how they get away with it. Because they know that in the next election, in 2014, November 2014, the expectation is that 60% of the American people are not going to vote.
Right.
And of the 60%, probably 70, 80% of low-income people are not going to vote. So if you're sitting there and the American people say, raise the minimum wage, strengthen Social Security, protect Medicare and Medicaid, but you know that a lot of the people who are impacted are not going to vote, you don't have to worry about that.
Right.
What you worry about are the guys who contribute heavily to your campaign. And that's the cynical nature of what goes on here.
Oh, it's horrible. You know, we have the 2014 midterms coming up, obviously, in November, and then on to 2016. We've talked about this before. Bernie Sanders, you've said that a couple of times, you have been honest, you said that if no one else steps up who's going to put out a progressive campaign, who's going to talk about progressive ideas and ideals and priorities, then I'll do it. Will you? I mean, what? Obviously, if Hillary's the only declared candidate, you'd step up and do it?
Well, you know, it is you quoted me accurately. That's what I have said. It's not that I wake up every morning thinking I have to be president of the United States. I think anyone who thinks that is a little bit crazy, given the problems facing this country. But I do believe that when a middle class is disappearing, when we have the whole challenge and crisis of climate change, when we are the only nation in the industrialized world that doesn't guarantee people health care through a national health care program, when, you know, as we've discussed, the gap between the very, very rich and everybody else is growing wider, when we don't have any campaign finance for home, when we have all of these issues out there, we need candidates to stand up for the middle class and working families of this country. I believe that very strongly.
Yes.
We can't have a campaign when the major issues are not being discussed. And I'll tell you, I get around the country a little bit, Nicole. I was in South Carolina and North Carolina and Minnesota last weekend. And you would be surprised at how much support there is out there for a strong progressive agenda that represents the needs.
I'm not surprised. I know there is. I think we are kind of like the bubbling majority. We're here. We're just waiting to pop up, but we're here.
That's right. That is exactly right.
Yep.
So I think, you know, and the other thing that we need to do, and I hope people who are listening to the show understand that, if the turnout in this election in 2014 is low, the Republicans will control
everything.
The United States Senate and the United States House.
Yep.
If the turnout is high, they will not. Simple as all that.
Yep.
And people do not have the luxury anymore of saying, oh, my God, everything is terrible, everything is awful, I'm not going to vote, I'm not going to participate. Sorry.
Right. No.
We don't have that luxury anymore.
Do not.
We've got to do the best that we can. We got to support the best candidates that we possibly can. Even if they're not perfect, we got to mobilize our friends and our neighbors to get out and vote. 40% voter turnout is a national disgrace, so we've got to do a lot better than that. And the Republicans are hoping and praying.
Right, and they're
doing everything that they can, by the way, to make sure the turnout is as low as
right. Well, of course, that's why the restrictions on the voter IDs. Exactly. That's why, I mean, everything they're doing, because look, we like to win honestly, right? They'll lie, cheat, and steal. They don't care. They'll win ugly as long as they win. They'll do whatever it takes.
Gerrymandering.
Yep.
They win by making it harder for people to vote. So our job is to bring people out. Look, this is a great country with a great history. I do not think that the majority of our people want to become an oligarchy.
No,
where
we're already there.
Our economy and politics are run by a handful of billionaires. That's the challenge that we face, and we've got to stand together and move forward.
Let me ask you one last question, because you are always referred to as the independent senator from Vermont, because you're not a Democrat. You caucus with the Democrats, and they call you the independent, but actually you are a democratic socialist, yes?
Yes.
And I was just sharing with the listeners the story of city councilwoman from Seattle, Shama Sawant, who helped usher through today. They announced a deal with labor and business in Seattle to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And she is a socialist. Socialism is not a dirty word, is it?
Well, I think if people understand history, what they will understand, not only history, but understand what goes on around the world. Mm-hmm. Throughout Scandinavia and in Europe, you have had democratic socialist governments, social democratic governments, which have passed legislation over the years, which have provided health care to all people as a right, which provide free college education, which make it possible when you have a baby to have 6 months off with full pay or half pay. It depends on the country, which make sure that moms have great child care available for their kids, which have strong retirement benefits, essentially which have governments working for ordinary people. Yeah. And they have voter turnouts, by the way, that are much, much higher than we do. And they have free speech, so it's not restricting of freedom of speech. But they have governments that work for ordinary people. Most Americans don't know that.
No, they don't know that. And because they believe, because they hear right-wing talk radio, equate that socialist, fascist, Nazi Muslim, describing President Obama, who was none of the above. But, if they would do a little reading once in a while, read some history books, read Howard Zinn, learn something about history, learn something about the world, they might realize, actually there are some socialist countries who take care of their people. And
also to understand, just in one example, in the area of health care, there is one major country on earth, one, that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right.
That would be us.
That is the United States of America. So, I just don't know how many folks know that, but that is a simple reality, and we've got to do better.
Well, again, if they didn't keep cutting funds for public education, people might learn those things. It's one of those. Well, Senator Sanders, I do hope you run. And as I said the last time we spoke, I hope you run as a Democrat, because we need your voice on that big stage, the debate stage, so that you can help pull all the other Democrats to the left and make them understand what being a progressive means. So I would love to see it. I hope it happens. Bernie for president. I'm there.
Okay. Nicole, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Senator Bernie Sanders. He is a gem. He is a gem. Sanders, Warren, Sanders. Then I'll be really happy. All right. 866-87-RANDY is the number. Nicole Sandler for Randi Rhodes. We'll be right back.
Let's get radical. Why don't we run Jesus himself for president? I mean, why not? What American that you know wouldn't want to vote for Jesus Christ of Nazareth? A guy who was a peaceful, radical, nonviolent revolutionary who hung around with lepers, hookers, and crooks, who never spoke English, was not an American citizen, who was anti-wealth, drove the capitalists out of the temple, anti-death penalty, anti-public prayer. Yes, he was Matthew 6:5, but never once anti-gay, never mentioned abortion, never really condemned premarital sex, never called the poor lazy, never justified torture, never asked a leper for a copay, never fought for tax cuts for the wealthiest Nazarenes, and was a long-haired, brown-skinned, it's in Revelation, sorry Kirk Cameron, community organizing, homeless, Middle Eastern Jew.
Oh, he left out socialist in that one. John Fugel sang there. Nicole Sandler in for Randi Rhodes. Yes, Jesus was a socialist. All right, let's go to the phones. Victor in San Francisco, listening on AM 910. Hi.
Hey.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good.
Yeah, I'm a big, huge Randi fan.
Me
I've
too.
been listening to her program for at least 10 years. And nobody motivates somebody by listening to her program. She articulates the Republican threat, their whatever you want to call it, their strategy, better than anyone, and she really exposes them. And I think that's the biggest thing that they are threatened by is people knowing what they're trying to do. I mean, they're all out in the open now.
Oh, yeah. Well, information is power, and they do not want you to have information.
It's completely power, and I feel terrible that we're losing our general.
Me too.
I mean, Randi, I wish you would stay until November and finish this beautiful 30-year career. On top, maybe we can win this thing.
I think, well, look, I wish she could stay too. And I think, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but we can win. Just people have to vote. And that means you and I, if it means volunteering with the local Democratic Club so that we can go and give people rides to the polls, we need to make sure people vote. Look, Democrats traditionally do not vote in midterms. I'm coming up against the clock, so I'm sorry, but thank you for the call, and I agree about Randi. She's a voice that we need. We need to get her voice back.
Randi Rhodes Show. This is the Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up your mind.
All of us across this country, in those long moments, we're staring civil war in the face. All over this country, at this moment, we are still staring civil war in its bloody face. To believe otherwise is to whistle past the graveyard of our own history. We have, to use the blunt words of my Michigan farmer, Grandpa Vanderbilt, arrived at nut-cutting time.
Okay, this is, welcome back to the Randi Rhodes Show, Hour 3 of the Thursday edition. I'm Nicole Sandler of RadioOrNot.com, in for Randi. If you thought things at the Bundy Ranch and the federal land around it in Nevada were over, I think again. It's even gotten a bit more insane. This guy, you hear the generator in the background. I guess it's powering up his little microphone. That is Mike Vanderberg, I think is how you pronounce his name. He is the founder of the 3%er militia, still inciting people there to violence. So this, I guess, was from yesterday. Let's listen to a little more, shall we?
This is not a question whose different answers can be compromised or negotiated or finessed. It is one or the other. That of individual liberty codified by the Constitution,
I don't think he's read it.
The rule of law under the Founders Republic, or the rule of man as represented by the law of the jungle, backed up by the iron fist of tyrannical government.
You know, it's so amazing because he's out there in support of a guy who is breaking the law with impunity, who has for decades broken the law, who has thumbed his nose at court decisions and injunctions and you know, and just says, you know, I don't recognize the federal government, really. And he's talking about the empirical rule of a big government. The law of the land is the law of the land, right? But it gets better.
Harry Reid understands it. Y'all saw what he said the other day. This isn't over, he said. You know what? He's right.
Yeah. Because they're still there.
It can never be over until one side or the other wins.
Really? Wins? Is this a war?
Don't think he's just talking about the bunch. He is promising us all civil war on a vast scale.
So there he is saying Harry Reid is promising us all civil war on a mass scale. No, Harry Reid is not saying that at all. In fact, when Harry Reid called you know, he called Cliven Bundy a domestic terrorist. Actually, what he should have said is those people who were taking up arms defending a lawbreaker, those are the terrorists. They're the ones threatening war. They're the ones threatening federal officers with guns. That's sedition. Those people should be rounded up and arrested, and I'm amazed they're still able to congregate there and do this stuff. You know, I think back to the Occupy Wall Street protests. Peaceful, nonviolent protests. Occupy, look, I had a lot of problems with Occupy, you know, but in that they didn't have many rules or many, you know, specific goals. But their one rule was no violence. One rule was peaceful, nonviolent protest, and a militarized police force in city after city after city hit them with everything from tear gas to pepper spray to what are those blast bombs? Those you know, flashbang grenades. They treated it was a violent police action against these peaceful protesters, and here you have lawbreakers taking up arms against the government, and it's hands off. something is wrong with this picture. So there he was, this 3%er guy, Mike Vanderberg, saying Harry Reid is threatening civil war. No.
Hell on earth is what he wants. Because state-sponsored violence is the only way that they can win an argument. Free people, especially free people who are armed and willing to use those arms in defense of liberty. Harry Reid says this isn't over. Based on the warning y'all gave him and his bully boys last week, he should fervently pray that it is.
It sounded like a threat to me.
As for me, I think I'll send him a soap dish.
Send him a soap dish?
2014 Award for Incitement to Civil War.
Award for Incitement to Civil War?
I will send it as a reminder with the message, don't poke the Wolverine with a sharp stick, Harry, unless you want your balls ripped off.
Yeah. Okay. Now, that to me sounded like a threat against a U.S. Senator. Don't poke a Wolverine with a sharp stick unless you want your, can I say that word? Balls ripped off. Really? And these people are still there. Not only are they still there, still armed to the teeth, they are, they've set up checkpoints around town. And just know that the residents of the aptly named Bunkerville, Nevada, aren't too happy. So a little later this hour, we're going to speak with Nevada journalist John Ralston. He worked for both major newspapers there. He's got a TV show. He is like the go-to journalist in Nevada. He's got a great piece up in Politico right now about the not-so-jolly rancher, how federal officials botched the Bundy cattle roundup. And the fact that they're still there spouting that nonsense is proof positive that the feds botched it. I'm sorry. They need to stop this nonsense now. And again, the fact that they reacted to peaceful, nonviolent protesters during the Occupy movement with horrible force, and these people are still out there armed to the teeth threatening war, threatening civil war, threatening the Senate majority leader, they should all be locked up. Every last one of them. All right. 866-87-RANDY is the number. 866-877-2634. Judy in Seattle. Hi.
Hi there, Nicole. You know, I've never actually talked to you, but I've talked to Randy for many, many years.
Uh-huh.
And so I am definitely going to miss her. But I just wanted to say today I am proud to be somebody who lives in Seattle.
Yes. How awesome is this?
I mean, you know, we have $15 an hour now. We can smoke pot and get married, but we still don't have a progressive radio station.
I know. Well, and you did. And now it's a sports station because this is what's happening around the country. They don't want our voices out there.
No, they don't. But so far, it's still working here in Seattle, and I'm still hoping it will continue to work here.
Well, hopefully, you know, the internet will stay neutral. You know, we keep net neutrality.
That's the next big thing.
You know, because you can find good progressive talk online, and I hope you'll check out radioornot.com. But let's talk about Shama Sawant because she's pretty awesome, huh?
I voted for her.
Good for you. Good for you. And so this $15 an hour minimum wage will be phased in. It'll raise incrementally through the end of the decade. But that's great.
And you know something? It's going to help everybody, including my daughter, who right now earns only slightly above minimum wage here in Washington. The minimum wage is like $9.50 an hour, and she earns, I think, $10.35 an hour, and I can tell you right now, she ends up, she and her boyfriend, who also earns minimum wage, they have an apartment together, and they still have to visit the food bank in order to make ends meet. And she runs around in a 15-year-old car when she drives it, which is hardly ever because she can't afford the gas.
Right.
And you know, it's just it's ridiculous. I mean, when you've got two people bringing in money and by the time you get done paying your rent, paying your food, paying your bills, and all that stuff like that, she still has to visit the food bank.
It's so sad.
And she works, she doesn't work full-time because they won't allow her to work full-time.
Wow. We need some elected officials like you have there in the Seattle City Council. We need those kind of elected officials in D.C.
Nationally.
Standing up for us. Fighting, just like what Bernie Sanders was saying. We need more of him. We need more Alan Graysons. We need more Elizabeth Warrens. We need real progressives. And Sean and I were talking during the break that, or maybe it was Beowulf, and I said, when I said Sanders, Warren, Sanders, how awesome would that be? You know why? Because the sleeping giant would awaken. Because people like you and me all over this country would say, yes, now I have something to be excited about.
Yeah, really. I mean, the idea of Hillary Clinton running and winning as a woman is exciting for me. But beyond that...
Right. Really? We want another Clinton, number one, and Hillary Clinton, who, is too buddy-buddy with Wall Street. And I'm sorry. It's time for something new. It's time for a real progressive. And she is not that.
When they do the polls about Obama's approval ratings, and they're like, like 45 to 50 or something in the 40s, and they're saying, look how low they are. You see. What they don't actually tell you is that I'm disappointed in Obama, too.
For different reasons, right.
I'm disappointed that he hasn't spoken out enough for what he should be speaking out for, and putting the kibosh on things, like instead of farting around, with the pipeline and,
how about this? He should be working to expand Social Security rather than cut benefits. This chain CPI nonsense and the grand bargain, that's a smack in the face to the Democrats who came before him and fought so hard for those protections.
Yes, I mean, that's crap. And so because of that, I'm disappointed with him. I'm not disappointed with him because he's not conservative enough. I'm disappointed with him because he isn't doing what he promised to do in 2008.
I'm there with you.
And so that and Hillary Clinton, in many ways, if she ends up getting the nomination and running against a Republican, I will in fact vote for her.
So will I.
It's not because I will be voting for her.
It'll be against them.
I am not voting for the other person.
Of course, it'll be against them. Look, and I've said that. I'm here in Florida, right? And we have a gubernatorial race coming up. And Rick Scott is evil. He is just evil incarnate. This is just an indication of how people vote against their own best interest. Rick Scott was the company that he founded and headed had to pay the biggest fine in history for the largest Medicare fraud ever perpetrated on the American people. And the state of Florida elects him as governor. Florida, right?
Yeah,
and so,
Florida.
right, and
really?
so. Right. And so now we have a real progressive in a woman named Nan Rich. She was a state senator for years. She led the Senate Democrats until she was term limited out. She's been running. She's a progressive. She's awesome. But the Florida Democratic Party sold its soul for Charlie Crist's endorsement of Obama. I mean, it's insane. And so now the media and the Florida Democratic Party and everybody else talks about Charlie Crist as if he's the nominee. Well, you know what? The Florida primary isn't until August 12th. I'm sorry. I will go head on for Nan Rich and fight for her. And Charlie Crist won't debate her either, by the way, which is chicken. Sorry. And, finally, after the primary, if Charlie Crist gets the nomination, I'll hold my nose and vote against Rick Scott. But I'm sorry. He's doing the same tricks that the Republicans play. It's disgusting. We need to stand up and get real progressives elected if we want to see the change that's going to get this country back on the right track. Judy, thank you so much for the call. It was great talking with you.
Nicole, thank you very much, and I will be listening to your podcast, just not at 7 a.m.
No, that's fine. That's why the podcast is there, and it's always free. So the radioornot.com, you can get it all there. All right?
All right. Thank you,
you.
Nicole. You have a good day.
You too. All right, we'll take a break. Come back with more of your calls next. And still to come, John Ralston of Nevada on the Bundy nonsense, insanity. We'll be right back. Well, it's Nicole Sandler in for Randi Rhodes, taking your calls. Let's get back to it. Mike in Scottsdale, Arizona, listening on KPHX. Hi there.
Hi, Nicole. can I be a little critical of you first?
Yeah.
I'll be respectful.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
When you say these people should be rounded up and arrested, it sounds like those right-wingers when they talk about illegal aliens, and I don't like that.
Yeah, but let me say this. I hear what you're saying, and I know. It just makes me angry that people taking up arms against federal officers are allowed to just, that the feds backed off and said, okay, you stay here, we'll leave. And this is emboldening them to do more. And then they were saying, all right, where else can we go? Who else can we protect? Who else's freedom can we protect when they're breaking the law?
Well, I understand your concern. I've got to tell you, I came down from Cedar City, Utah, and I stopped in there yesterday for gas.
Oh, boy.
And I went through all those camps. I talked to people, went in the gas station, stayed in Vegas last night, had a great time. But anyway, my whole point about this, I talked to the gas station, the lady who runs the grocery store. She said her sales are up 10 times what normally is.
Well, right, because they've got a lot of people from out of town there.
Right, there's news crews camped out all over the place. The guys that are camped there, they're American citizens. They're not doing anything wrong. I don't agree with them,
but they're taking up arms. They're holding guns and pointing them at federal law enforcement officials.
But Nicole, they did that, yes.
Yeah.
But they're not doing that now. So just leave them alone.
So what are they doing now?
What are they doing?
Yeah.
They're just hanging out. I swear to God.
They're just talking about having a civil war and blowing off Harry Reid's balls?
They're selling T-shirts. There's vendors there. Like I said, there's news crews. There's all kinds of curiosity people buying hats and T-shirts.
Oh, my God.
They've got 2 or 3 camps. I went to one of the camps down by the Virgin River. It's a big sandy river.
Yeah.
It actually was so windy. And here's my prediction, Nicole. And I won't take all your time.
It's okay.
You don't need to arrest them. In 2-3 weeks, the temps will be so hot they can't.
Oh, right. Well, here's my other idea. You know, first of all, it sounds like, you know, like a Glenn Beck rally gone bad, which, you know, if you can imagine that. But you know, you remember the Stephen King book, The Stand, I think it was, where, you know, all the good people went to, I guess there was some kind of a viral infection that killed off, you know, most of the population, and the ones that were left, the good people went to Boulder, Colorado. I guess they knew the pot laws were going to change eventually. And the bad guys all went to Vegas. So I say we give that part of the Nevada, you know, land there that's going to be like a burning desert soon, let them all go there. We can just put a giant fence around them and they can have at it.
Well, it's a wasteland. I don't think anybody wants to. Other than the town of Mesquite, and as you get up to St. George and into Cedar City, it's beautiful up in Utah, but you know, it's the same thing with Vegas. If it wasn't for the big resort casinos and everything, it'd be a wasteland too.
Yeah.
It's the worst desert in the world.
Right. Well, it was a desert. Look, you know, my parents, my father was a big gambler, a responsible gambler, but a gambler nonetheless. And when I was young, you know, he and my mom used to go on junkets because the hotels would fly him in. And we have old home movies from them going to Vegas in the 60s.
Wow.
And Vegas was empty. I mean, there were like 2 or 3 hotels on the Strip. You look at, and the Hoover Dam was there. And you look at that, and you look at it now. Wow. I may have to digitize those and, you know, put them up on my YouTube account or something because it's so interesting to see it now.
Yeah.
You know, see that.
Cosmopolitan, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. All right. I know.
Well, they're not a threat, Nicole. That's all I want
Well,
to say.
you know, I'm sorry. When somebody's pointing an assault rifle, you know, wearing paramilitary gear and pointing an assault rifle at federal law enforcement officers, I think that counts as dangerous. And I think it warrants an arrest. So maybe it's just me. We'll talk to John. It's Nicole Sandler in for Randi Rhodes, and we're working on getting John Ralston. But it's interesting because there's sort of dueling opinions about what's going on with these self-described militia members. You know, our last caller is I think what he was saying is, you know what, they're harmless. They're just wacko weirdos. Kind of, it's like a carnival. It's like, you know, it's like a Burning Man for nut jobs, you know, for the Alex Jones crowd, right? For the teabaggers. But then, you know, I see listener Tamara at Blue in Mo on Twitter, and she said, it's armed insurrection. They are keeping the people of Bunkerville hostage, stopping anyone from entering, not stopping there. And that's true. And I know that, well, some of the business people in town might be happy that they're making a little more money. The residents
are not happy. And now there is this piece up at Crooks and Liars, written by Dave Nywert. Back at the Bundy Ranch, it's Oath Keepers versus militiamen as wild rumors fly. It was the imminent drone attack that finally did it. A wild and paranoid rumor that the feds were planning to attack with a lethal drone revealed a deep rift in the Bundy Ranch ranks. So I guess there's infighting now on the ranch. Oh, boy. You know, there's the other thing. You know, let them just kill each other off and keep us out of it. That'd work. All right, back to the phones. Frank in Albuquerque. Hi.
Luckily for us, Nicole, none of those Bundy idiots at the ranch are smart enough to register voters while they're selling the T-shirts.
Well, they don't believe in the federal government, so why would they vote for a member of Congress, right?
Well, but that kind of thing does attract a lot of attention. But, I had my popcorn ready to watch the great fight at the Clive and Bundy Ranch, but it turned out to be a dud. People like me and you who've been arrested by the fascists, we know that in the United States of America, law enforcement is about easy targets. So, I'm guessing they're just going to leave the insane racist traitors with guns alone and come after people like us.
Okay, now, you know what? Look, I appreciate the police, and I do believe that the majority of them are good. I think some people go into law enforcement for the wrong reasons, and they put on a badge and they holster a gun and they think that they're in charge. But I think for the most part, most people who go into law enforcement do so for good reasons. That said, I don't know what goes through the mind of someone who, for instance, would pepper spray a group of students sitting down in silent protest. I don't get it, but it happens, and I have to hope that these authorities, the feds in Nevada, are figuring out a way to arrest the people who are raising arms in insurrection. Hey, Frank, I got to run because we got John Ralston, but thank you for the call. John Ralston is he is a Nevada journalist. He's been around at both newspapers. He's the host of TV's Ralston Reports. He runs his own website now, ralstonflash.com, and he's got a piece up at Politico.com, The Not So Jolly Rancher, about Mr. Bundy. Hi, John. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Randi Rhodes Show.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So I read your piece at Politico, how federal officials botched the Bundy cattle roundup. And I think they did, too. I mean, the fact that they just left while there are people taking up arms against federal officers, how can they just walk away from that?
Well, I think, to be honest with you, I think this has been botched at every step of the way, including going all the way back 20 years. I mean, they've allowed this guy to essentially be a criminal for 20 years without doing anything about it. They considered doing something in 2012, then backed off. This time they decided to go through with it, but they didn't really listen to local law enforcement, and so they unnecessarily antagonized some people going in. Now, Bundy was spoiling for a fight from day one, but the problem is that he then alerted all these other folks to his cause, and so you had these militia types descending on this nice, peaceful town 80 miles from Las Vegas. And then it got to the point where the local sheriff became very, very worried that there could be a real bloodbath there. I mean, there were kids running around. Right. There were people who had essentially no business being there and weren't armed, running around among federal officers, local law enforcement, and these armed militia gangs who were there. So they decided discretion was the better part of valor. But now you've got the problem is the precedent this sets is this to all the hundreds of other ranchers across this country. Well, if you don't want to pay your grazing fee, get some militia types to come down and the federal government will back off.
Right.
So they have to do something.
I agree.
I'm fairly convinced they will do something, but I think they're going to wait for the temperature to go down a little bit more.
Right, I hear you. Now, over at Crooks and Liars, my friend Dave Nywert has a post up that says there was a rumor going around that a drone attack was imminent, and it caused some division between the Oath Keepers and the militiamen, and the Oath Keepers were urging everyone to leave because a drone strike was coming, and the militiamen were getting mad. Might they just, fight amongst themselves and finish each other off?
Well, I watched an almost an hour-long video post today by 4 Oath Keepers who were there, And as a matter of fact, one of them is going to come on my program tonight, which ought to be something else, in which they talk about this warring among the militias, and in which they talk that they had credible evidence of a drone strike, which seems utterly fantastic.
Yes.
To me, of course. But there were definitely, these guys were talking about altercations with other militia members and how they essentially are portraying themselves as the responsible militia guys there. So this was a very, very combustible situation. You have people who are armed who were saying they were going to drop these other guys. And can you imagine if one person got shot, what would happen with the rest of them? So, and the sheriff here told me he's been to a lot of events in his life. He has never seen so many guns. So you just imagine what might have happened up there.
Right, I can, and that's what's so frightening. Now, then you had that Sheriff Richard Mack, who's not the current sheriff, right? He's a nut job. He's the one who was saying, well, if they start shooting, we're going to put the women and children up front. And then you've got these people taking up arms against, again, federal officers. I wonder why they just didn't go in there fully decked out in bulletproof gear and stand their ground and say, bring it on. Make them, the militia people, the crazies, attack, because I don't think they would. Or do you? I mean, are they that nuts?
I think some of them are actually that nuts, from what I've been able to find out. Secondly, I think the BLM at the highest levels, even up to the Secretary of the Interior, Sally Jewell, wanted to press forward, but were only at the last minute persuaded to back off by local law enforcement, and based upon the number of people who, by the time of the roundup, were massing there and were very, very well armed. Now, the BLM and the National Park Service had about 150 people there, but I'm not sure that wouldn't have resulted in, what some people are describing as a Waco or Ruby Ridge situation, where you would have had some really bad bloodshed, and there would have been arguments about who fired first, et cetera. And so I just think they decided in the end it just wasn't worth it. Now, they never should have allowed the situation to develop to the point where it was. That is what the travesty is here now. I talked to some former BLM officials, one of whom was fairly high-ranking, who said what they need to do is somehow get in there and arrest Bundy and get him out of there and essentially say you're going to stay in jail until those cattle are taken away and sold and you pay your fees.
Right. And is that even being discussed?
They're being very, very closed-mouthed about what the next option is. You can understand why. They don't want to tip anybody off to when they might do whatever they're going to do. And so the local sheriff here has tried to talk Bundy out of doing anything. He's tried to talk him into the court system. But this is a guy who I believe has already been so elevated by people around him and to these lofty levels, and now he's starting to believe the virtual reality that's been set up around him is reality. And so I just don't think there's any talking to him about doing that now.
Well, so John Ralston, you've been around media enough, obviously, hosting your own TV show, writing for newspapers, but you've been in that part of the country for a long, long time. You know it well. How much do you think Sean Hannity's propping up of Bundy has had an impact on this? I mean, do you think that this has emboldened him because he's gotten, I guess the stamp of approval from Sean Hannity?
Well, I've said before, and I'll say it again, I think what Hannity did was totally irresponsible. He elevated Bundy. He essentially started asking Bundy whether he would get into a violent confrontation with federal officials. And so the whole Fox News, conservative blogosphere, right-wing talk radio nonsense clearly emboldened not just Bundy, but the folks around there. And then you have some local officials doing the same thing, pandering to that side. You have a U.S. senator going on a NBC affiliate here, calling those folks patriots.
I know.
I mean, it's just, it's really, really embarrassing, and frankly, it's very, very dangerous.
It is dangerous, and that's the thing that's so scary. The fact that, one, there are so many weapons, and two, these people are nuts, and they're talking about, I just played the clip from the, what's his name, the Vanderbaugh guy, the 3%er, talking talking about, Civil War, and this is not over, and Harry Reid, and I'm going to tear his balls off. And I mean, and those people would bring children to that kind of an atmosphere. It sounds like a powder keg that's about to blow.
Well, I think it's dissipated a little bit because I think to some extent, after Bundy started showing how little he knows about race in America, I think a lot of people have stepped away from him saying, wait a second. I think some of the militia folks have left, but they're still up there, too. And there have been allegations of them setting up checkpoints and doing all kinds of other things. The congressman who represents that district there has asked local law enforcement to investigate what some of his constituents have told him. So there is still an atmosphere up there that I think can be described as potentially incendiary, and so I think they're going to be very, very careful.
Yeah, well, definitely. So, I had a caller just a few minutes ago who just drove through Bunkerville. Boy, if there was ever an aptly named town.
Yeah.
Drove through Bunkerville yesterday, and he said actually some of the local businesses are happy because their business is up, 300% or whatever. How are the townspeople feeling about all this?
Well, I think they're divided. I mean, I think some people are sympathetic to Bundy's cause, but a lot of others are worried about, this is a very peaceful community. Nothing ever happens up there, and they're happy about that. And so their way of life has been disturbed by this, and they want them gone. And those are the ones who have come to me, they've gone to the congressman and said, do something about it.
Do you think this is just going to play, or you don't know? I mean, we'll have to wait and see what happens.
I hate to speculate on what might happen.
Right.
Next, but I wish I could tell you that this is over. It's not over.
Wow. It's nice. I guess since Bundy showed that he's a bigoted idiot who knows nothing, maybe some of the people left, and some of the media attention seemed to die down. So when I saw the other day that they actually set up checkpoints and they're checking people before they come into town, tell us what that's about.
Well, that's what Stephen Horsford, the congressman who represents the area, said he's been told by some of his constituents. No one's gotten pictures of these checkpoints. I had an extensive email from a woman who lives up there who said on Easter Sunday people were intimidated from going into church by the presence of all these armed men surrounding the area. But what exactly is going on up there? All I can tell you is that some of the people are very unsettled by it.
Yeah, well, that's understandable. Look, I'm all the way here in Florida, and I'm unsettled by it. Right?
Exactly.
Well, best of luck. We'll follow along. I know we can find your work at ralstonflash.com. John Ralston, thank you so much, and best of luck out there.
Thanks for having me on.
It's good to talk with you. Bye-bye. All right. What a horrible situation. And what is with these? Can you imagine? I'm sorry. Look, I don't believe in infringing on people's rights. We have a right to gather, but we have a right to peaceful gathering. When you gather with arms, and you heard them say, look, the one sheriff said, I've never seen so many guns in one place. That is a recipe for disaster. Now, interesting, I got a tweet from somebody. A politic wizard said, Nicole, if the rumors are true about the infighting, I think we should airdrop whiskey. They'll kill each other off. You know what? They're in the Vegas desert. Give them peyote. Who knows what could happen? I would watch that movie. All right. One more break. Nicole Sandler in for Randi Rhodes. We'll grab another couple of calls at 866-87-RANDY, 866-877-2634. We'll be right back. I'll tell you, this is the fastest 3 hours each day. It just zooms by. I'm Nicole Sandler in for Randi Rhodes. Randi will be back Monday. Tomorrow we'll finish off the week talking about really, I think, the two biggest issues that we've been dealing with this week. They're wealth inequality, right, and racism. That has just reared its ugly head in a sickening way. So we'll be joined by David K. Johnston and Tim Wise, who both fascinating, brilliant men. So we'll also, talk to you. Look, I hate that this show is going away. I hate the fact that I'm not going to hear Randi's voice every day, her wisdom and her take on what's going on in the world, because it's a voice we need. And this show that is put together so beautifully, it is so researched, it is so fact-filled, and a lot of work goes into getting Randi's show on the air and through the 3 hours each day. Her great staff, we got Sean Smith-Pierce and Beowulf Rockland, who's been with the show since January. Actually, Tammy Herrera is out sick today, and we've had Jeff DeRay in her place, so thank you, Jeff. But tomorrow, we want to take your calls. I know Sean said, hey, if anyone has any questions about the show, they can call in, yeah?
We've got some questions, and email and that kind of thing, or tweet, or they can tweet you, or they can, whichever.
You guys have been hot on Twitter today, I'll tell you. So, we'll do that tomorrow, and look, Randi, it can be very modest at times, so maybe we can pay a little tribute to her because, wow, she deserves all the praise. We can meet out. Okay? All right. So, Melody in Columbus, Ohio, listening on iHeartRadio. Hi, you're on the Randi Rhodes Show with Nicole.
Hi, Nicole. I just had a really quick point to make, something I haven't heard anybody bring up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a real small business person. I'm actually really more self-employed.
Uh-huh.
A couple ladies that work with me once in a while, I can't pay them less than $12 an hour. I feel too guilty.
Right. Well, because you understand these are human beings. And, when you think of someone working for $7.25 an hour, how, it's criminal.
Now, let me tell you, most really small business people, owners I know, don't pay minimum wage. They're already paying $9 or $10 an hour because you can't keep a good person.
That's right.
Unless you pay them to where they actually want to come into work every day.
Sure, and again, you want people who want to come in, who are enthusiastic about the work. And if you pay them, if you pay them such measly wages, it's telling them that's what you think of them.
Well, and think about it this way. People like us that already pay a good wage, and people like Costco and some other grocery stores I know of that pay a living wage.
Yep.
That way it's more fair to them.
Sure. Well, they get
else has to come up to their level, and that's more that levels the playing field for them.
Right, and they get better, more loyal employees, and they keep them longer. Plus, those people now have more money, so they can shop. They can spend their money at Costco, at your business. They can. The money goes right back into the economy, and that's why the Republicans' whole theory about how paying a higher minimum wage would hurt businesses is just bunk. Just doesn't make sense. Melody, thank you for the call. Thank you for listening and for engaging and being involved. Nicole for Randi. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, Randy.
The Randi Rhodes Show on the Premier